Silence feels harmless. At least that is what most people believe. A quiet room, without voices, without movement, without any sound pressing against your attention, often feels safe at first. The mind welcomes it. Breathing slows, muscles loosen, and thoughts begin to drift gently, without urgency or direction. In those early moments, the absence of noise feels like relief rather than discomfort. But when silence continues, something begins to change. As minutes pass, the mind stops resting and starts listening, not outward toward the environment, but inward toward itself. Every small sensation grows louder. The sound of breathing becomes noticeable. The faint movement of blood inside the ears becomes impossible to ignore. What once felt empty now feels full. Gradually, the absence of sound shifts from unnoticed to uncomfortable, and then to disturbing. The human brain was never designed for true silence. It evolved in environments filled with constant signals, wind moving through trees, footsteps on the ground, animals shifting nearby, voices calling out. Sound meant presence, sound meant awareness, sound meant survival. For most of human history, silence did not represent peace. It represented danger. Predators move quietly. Threats approach without warning. Total silence often meant that something was wrong. When sound disappears completely, the brain does not interpret this as safety. It interprets it as missing information, and missing information is never neutral. Heart rate begins to change. Attention narrows. The mind starts scanning for threats that cannot be seen or heard. Thoughts begin to repeat. Memories surface without invitation. The quiet becomes heavy, almost physical in its presence. Silence does not calm the mind. It removes the evidence that everything is normal. Without sound, the brain cannot confirm distance, cannot confirm movement, and cannot confirm control over the environment. When the brain cannot confirm control, it prepares for danger. This is why silence feels tense instead of peaceful, why a quiet room at night feels different from the same room during the day, and why complete silence can make people uneasy, restless, or afraid. The threat is not external, it is internal. Silence leaves the mind alone with itself, without distraction, without reassurance, and without signals from the outside world to ground perception. The brain begins to fill the gap, and once it does, silence stops feeling empty. It begins to feel alive. The human brain is not a passive organ. It does not wait for information. It actively predicts it. Every second, it compares what it expects to sense with what actually reaches the body. And this constant comparison is what creates stability. Sound plays a critical role in that process. Even background noise confirms space, distance, and continuity. It tells the brain that the world is still there and behaving as expected. When silence removes auditory input, this predictive system begins to fail. The brain does not slow down, it accelerates. Neural circuits responsible for hearing increase their sensitivity, searching for patterns that no longer exist. The mind begins listening harder, not because something is there, but because nothing is. This heightened state is not relaxation, it is vigilance. Without sound, the brain cannot accurately predict what will happen next. And when prediction becomes unreliable, uncertainty takes over. Uncertainty activates the same biological systems associated with threat detection. This is why prolonged silence often produces tension rather than calm. As silence continues, the brain may begin generating its own signals. Ringing in the ears, imagined movement, or the sensation that something has shifted nearby are common responses. This is not imagination or weakness, it is compensation. The brain would rather create false input than process none at all. Silence also removes external structure. Without sound, attention turns inward, and internal processes grow louder. Thoughts become more noticeable. Self-awareness intensifies. Minor bodily sensations demand attention. Errors in perception become more likely, and the mind begins monitoring itself instead of the environment. This inward focus creates a feedback loop. The more attention turns inward, the more unstable perception becomes. The brain begins questioning its own signals, doubting its interpretations, and struggling to regain certainty. The discomfort does not come from silence itself, but from the loss of reliable information. The brain does not fear silence as an absence, it fears silence as uncertain. Because without reliable input, prediction collapses, and without prediction, the mind cannot protect itself. Silence does not simply remove sound, it removes distraction. When the external world becomes quiet, the mind loses its anchors. There is nothing to interrupt thought, nothing to pull attention outward, and nothing to dilute internal experience. In this state, the brain's default mode network becomes dominant, shifting attention toward memory, self-reflection, and internal narrative. Memories resurface without effort. Unfinished thoughts return without invitation. Emotions that were once background noise move into focus. The mind is no longer reacting to the environment. It is reacting to itself. This inward focus can feel overwhelming because the human brain was not designed to observe itself continuously. In silence, awareness tightens, time perception changes, minutes stretch. The mind begins monitoring its own activity, questioning thoughts, evaluating sensations, and searching for meaning where none is required. Prolonged silence often produces the sensation of being watched, not by something external, but by consciousness itself. Without sound, there is no feedback from the world to confirm identity or presence. Voices no longer reflect the self. Responses no longer confirm existence. The boundaries that usually define identity begin to weaken. Identity depends on interaction. The mind stabilizes itself through constant exchange with the environment. Sound, movement, and response reinforce who we are and where we exist. When those signals disappear, the sense of self becomes less defined. This is why isolation and silence can feel destabilizing. Not because they introduce chaos, but because they remove structure. Mental stability is not permanent. It is maintained through stimulation, feedback, and connection. Silence reveals this dependence. It shows that the brain does not require trauma to feel threatened. It only requires uncertainty. When nothing pushes back, the mind turns inward, amplifying memory, heightening vigilance, and creating meaning to replace what is missing. That is why silence feels like a threat to the mind. Not because it harms the brain directly, but because it removes the structure that keeps perception grounded. When the world goes quiet, the mind must face itself without protection, and that is a condition it was never designed to endure for long.